Now it all starts with a hunger. It starts with a real desire on your part. And all these infinite states are simply to satisfy the hungers of men. So you want to be good, as you understand good to be. You want to be wealthy, as you understand it. You want to be famous, as you understand it. All these are states. Go into the state before you are qualified. Go into the state and stay there. The state has all the things necessary to externalize itself. But you are the occupant power. You have to go into the state and dwell there. Now, as I go into it, let me remain in it. If I come back like the positron, I'm simply going to be turned right around. I'm not going to be deflected and continue my journey in the same direction, only deflected. I'm going to be so shocked, and everyone is shocked. When I go into a state and it seems like this, it seems so real. When I open my eyes, oh, here I am, back there. But that shock turns me around from that return to my motion forward now as an electron. I'm not a positron anymore. I was a positron when I actually started back in time. And when I reached this body, and the body is jolted when I open my eyes, then what I did there, I am moving across a bridge of incident now, some series of events that leads me up to the fulfillment in what the world calls reality. But it was real when I occupied it in my imagination. That's when it was real. We exist in these bodies. We live in our imaginations. For our imaginations, these are the only realities. Imagination is God. That is the divine body, Jesus. I used to sit and simply try it in my living room. I couldn't see the chair where I sat in the living room from the telephone in the hallway. I would sit at the telephone in my imagination while my body was in the living room. And then I would assume I'm at the telephone. Physically, I couldn't see that body. And then suddenly I would feel myself back on the chair. And what a shock. And then from the chair, I would put myself back at the telephone. I would stand on the outside of the house and see it like this building. See it from the street rather than from here. And assume while I'm standing here that I am looking at the building from the outside. And suddenly you are on the outside. And you're looking at it from the outside. Do it with your own home. Do it with anything in your room. And that gets you sort of in a state of moving. You become mobile, as it were. And it's easy then to occupy any state. And they're only states. So when someone thinks themselves so important, it's only a state, but all right, that state in itself is important to them. And anyone occupying that state must do exactly what they would do. If I were in the state of Hitler, I would do the same thing Hitler did. Because it's a state, and if I fall into it, knowingly or unknowingly, I've got to play that part. So he does not consider the just or the wicked to be in a supreme state, but to be every one of them states of the sleep, which the soul falls into when it leaves paradise following the serpent. That serpent of generation. So here, you can be what you want to be if you know that all these are only states. And in the end, you are justified. You are completely exonerated. You are acquitted, divinely acquitted. So let no one frighten you as to what you must do to earn the kingdom. You do not earn the kingdom. It's your Father's good pleasure to give it to you. And it's a gift that is not your due. It's not a reward for any good things you did. If you're in a state and you think that the good things you're doing is only the state, you moved into it, and I personally find it easier living in my world to be in good states. I find it easier to be kind than to be unkind. If I'm ever unkind, it hurts me more than anyone who received my dart, as it were. An unkind remark hurts me more than the one who received it from me. So I find it easier to be in that sort of a state. But eventually you will completely awake with a gift, and the gift is God himself. There's nothing but God in this world. But nothing but God. Someone called me up and asked me about devils. That she went down to this Christian Science practitioner who now feels she is now hungry with devils. Well, they teach devils, how the devil does this, the devil does that. Just getting away from the first and great commandment, which is the great commandment, the Shema, the confession of faith in the Hebraic world. Hear, O God, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. The minute you get away from that, you have a devil. There's another God, another creator, another something. And you have 2, you're going to have 4, you're going to have 8, 16, 32, and so on. Always come back to that fundamental state. There is only God. And God is your own wonderful human. Imagination. When you say, I am, that's God. There is no other and never will be another God. He is going to unfold himself within you and completely awaken. And when he awakens, you are God. And then you'll be clothed in that heavenly garment. And I'm telling you, it is a heavenly garment. I can't describe it other than to tell you, when you're in it, you're not standing on the earth. You're lifted off, as it were. And I can only describe it as air and fire. And when you glide by, and the sea of humanity, imperfect, you do not raise one little finger to change them. No compassion, because they cannot remain that way when you go by. And as you glide by, everyone is made perfect. Everyone, not one is left out. Doesn't matter what he did to lose his eyes, what he did to lose his arms, to lose his legs, to lose his tongue. It doesn't matter what he did. In your presence, he cannot remain imperfect. And everyone is made perfect. That is the kingdom. So it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. So set your hope fully upon this gift. And then you can endure the temporary ills of the world. Because we are moving through all these things, and not every moment of time are we alert to these states, and we can fall into it by reading the newspaper, fall into it by hearing a news bulletin, fall into it by a little conversation with a friend. And there we slip innocently into a state. But the state isn't concerned. You animated it. You made it alive when you entered it. Because you are the only resurrecting power in the world. You are the resurrecting, living power of the world. And that power is your own wonderful human imagination. So everyone here, put your mind at peace and don't think for one moment by being good, as the world calls good, by attending certain services and doing certain things and observing certain things, that there's something on the outside watching you and marking up some little thing in your favor. No, you're simply waiting for that appointed moment when he unveils himself. So you'll set your hope fully upon the grace that is coming to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ within you, which is the Lord and his Son. That is Jesus Christ. The Lord and his Christ. And Christ is the Son of God. And no one can say Jesus is Lord except by the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit is the remembrance. Well, he doesn't really bring about that remembrance until the Son appears. And when the Son appears, memory returns, and then you know who the Lord is, because you know who his Son is. And you wear this little garment until a few more years. You take it off, and then you are not in this world at all. You are in an entirely different world, where everything is perfect, because you are perfect. And when you want to make yourself seen by another, you make that choice. They do not come in search of you and see you. I'll give you one little story. She doesn't come here anymore. She may not be in the city. But she told me one night quite innocently. She said, I found myself out. I was very, very conscious. And I said to these people around me, do you know of Neville? And they said, yes. And then she said, who is he? And with that, she said, I was whirled as though I was some meteor flying through space, thrown out, as it were, and woke scared to death. You do not see one who has already been born from above until he chooses to show himself. He must manifest himself to you. You do not go looking for him. Because unless you are born from above, you cannot enter the kingdom. Even though it's his pleasure to give you the kingdom, it will come after your birth from above. Prior to that birth, he can't give you the kingdom. And one to whom he's already given the kingdom is not in the world. Though for a little while he is in the world telling the story, telling it from experience and not from theory. So I'm telling you exactly what has happened to me. I share it with you. And it's going to happen to you, every one of you. So let no one in any way try to convince you that you must be a little better than you are if you would get the kingdom. The kingdom is your gift. And listen to the words in the 11th chapter of Romans. It is irrevocable. The gift and the call of God are irrevocable. You cannot revoke it, and no one can revoke it. And your inheritance is not only God. You're told in the 4th chapter of Romans, you inherit the world. The world is yours, and all within it. You don't inherit some little portion of the world. You inherit God, and God owns the world, and the world is your inheritance. So in the 16th Psalm, David is made to say, the portion of my inheritance is the Lord. That's his portion. He inherits the Lord. The Son inherits the Father. And so a man matures when he becomes his own father. This is the great mystery of Scripture. And you will inherit the Father, for it is his will, and no one can break his will. It's your Father's good pleasure to give you. So when you hear people bragging how this one is better than the other one, forget it. They're judging states. So that man is richer because he's a state that is richer than the other state that is poor. But the occupant of the rich state does not differ from the occupant of the poor state. And the occupant of the state tonight that is in jail does not differ from the judge who sentenced them. One is not better than the other in the eyes of God. In the eyes of God, all are acquitted. That's justification. We are justified by his grace, we are told. All are justified by his grace. And grace is an unearned, unmerited gift of God. And that grace is God's last, his final gift, which is love in action. And God is love. It's his gift of himself. And that's when he gives you himself. There's not a thing else to give. He gave you himself. And the whole vast world is yours. So we inherit the earth. Now tonight, I hope you'll start practicing. Won't take you any time at all to try it. It costs you nothing. And it works wonders. You can sit here tonight or you go home. Put yourself in a state of affluence. What's wrong with that? I know, well, back in the 1920s, 1930s, we had a deep depression beginning in 29. And do you know that you could go to Tiffany and buy, say, 8 glasses, beautiful glasses for a wedding present? Cost you what? Not more than 75 cents. A beautiful glass. And in a Tiffany box. The whole thing was a Tiffany box, beautifully done. You'd go to Macy's or Gimbel's, and you'd buy something not comparable for $1, $1.25. But the majority would not be seen dead in Tiffany. That was style. That was something beyond them. They wouldn't even walk in. They felt embarrassed to walk in. Yet you could go into Tiffany, the jewels on the first floor, take the elevator to the third, where they had the lovely china and lovely glassware on another floor, and get a beautiful gift wrapped package from Tiffany. You didn't have to send 2 dozen. 8, that's enough. 8 beautiful glasses. And people would not go in. They were embarrassed to be seen in Tiffany. I'm quite sure the same thing is true here with their branch hair. And you could go to Tiffany and buy a lovely thing for very little, really. But people are trained, that means something that's classy and that and the other. And if you're in one state, you can't argue them out of it. They've got to get out of that state to be able to go into a state. And if you tell them, you know, at one time in your life, a $12 suit was all that you could afford and all you thought you could ever afford. You get out of that state and think something differently. And then you pay $250 for a suit easier than you could get at the $12 for the other suit. I know it happened in my own case. When I began to buy a suit for $250, it was easier for me to pay $250 than when I had to get at $12 for a suit. And if it rained, I had to start running. Or I couldn't get out of it. Now that is life. And you simply move from one state into another state. And the same being, I am not another being. I answer the same name. You say Neville, I answer. I answer then to the name Neville. And yet I move from one state to another state to another state. As you move from one state, what you couldn't do in one state, you find it so easy to do in the other state. I was in a state for the longest while where I couldn't eat meat, fish, fowl, drink alcohol, smoke, sex. Well, I did nothing. But nothing. Then overnight, my friend Abdullah told me, you're going to come back from Barbados and you will have died, you know. I said, I will die? He said, I don't mean that you're going to die and be buried in Barbados or buried at sea, but you will have died. All the things you haven't done in 7 years, you will be doing before you get back. Do you know he was true? And I couldn't tell you how it happened. I couldn't tell you how it happened. It just happened. In Barbados, I lived for 3 months in my mother's home and still lived as I did in New York City. And on my trip north in 10 days, I was doing everything I hadn't done in 7 years. And I cannot tell you how it happened. I moved out from one state into another state, and it came to me as normal and as natural to do the things I did at sea as I did in 7 years the other things that I didn't do. So I tell you, the only states, all states of consciousness. And if you recognize that, you can forgive every being in this world, no matter what he is, or what he plans to be, or what he has done. Because in the end, he is going to be justified. He is justified by the grace of God, as we are told. Everyone is justified by the grace of God. He is divinely acquitted. And when God acquits him, who is going to judge him? And after justification comes glorification. So he begins with those whom he foreknew. Well, he foreknew us, for he chose us in him before the foundation of the world. And if he chose me in him before the foundation of the world, then he knew me. And those whom he foreknew, well then he also predestined. He predestined them to be conformed to the image of his Son, that which reflects his glory and radiates his glory and bears the express image of himself. I am destined to be that, to be the express image of himself. And those whom he then predestined, he called. Call my sons from afar and my daughters from the end of the earth. Call them all. And he's calling us one by one by one, for we are so altogether unique. He can't call us in pairs. Call us one by one. And those whom he called, he also justified. And those whom he justified, he also glorified. So you are destined to be glorified with God, as God. And it will not in any way be stopped by anyone. So let no one frighten you.